teach you that World War I was a conflict fought with bayonets, barbed wire, and mustard gas, they are lying. The real war wasn't fought in the mud of the trenches. It was fought in the silence of gold reserves, in the bond markets, and in the secret offices of men who never set foot on a battlefield. The soldiers paid in blood. The bankers, they were calculating balance sheets. And what they did in those 4 years didn't just determine who won or lost. It rewired the entire global financial system in ways that are still trapping you today. If you think war is simply about politics, think again. Welcome to the Capital Chronicles. Today, we expose the weaponization of money. In 1914, Europe was already a powder keg. National rivalries and colonial ambitions had turned the continent into a chessboard of paranoia. But beneath all the speeches about honor and empire, there was a cold financial reality. War on this scale was impossible to fight without unimaginable sums of money. And here is the brutal truth. When leaders chose war, they were also choosing debt. Every empire marching its troops to the front line was also marching its people into a future of economic slavery. Yet at the start, most governments lived in a fantasy. They believed it would be quick, over by Christmas. They thought they could pay for it the old-fashioned way, with gold reserves and patriotic donations. Within weeks, that illusion collapsed. The war machine was burning money faster than anyone could comprehend. To understand why this matters to you, we have to look at the system they destroyed. In the summer of 1914, the world ran on the gold standard. Money wasn't just paper, it was a promise. Every pound, franc, or mark could be exchanged for actual physical gold. This system gave money credibility, but it tied the hands of governments. You couldn't just print endlessly without losing trust. But once millions of men were mobilized, the math became merciless. Germany alone was spending 10 million marks a day. The gold would not last. So they did what governments always do in a crisis. They changed the rules. One by one, the major powers suspended the gold standard. They quietly admitted to their citizens that money was now essentially a promise backed by nothing more than faith in the state. That moment, the breaking of the gold anchor, was the most critical financial shift in modern history. Money and power were unshackled from reality. The printing presses roared to life. And once governments tasted that freedom, they never went back. Now the financial war began in earnest. Germany, isolated by the Royal Navy's blockade, had no access to global markets. Their only option was to cannibalize their own population. Berlin launched massive bond drives, appealing to patriotism, urging grandmothers and workers to pour their life savings into the war. It was a pyramid scheme built on hope. When defeat came, those bonds became worthless paper. Millions of Germans saw their lives wiped out, creating the perfect breeding ground for the extremism that would follow. Britain, however, had an ace up its sleeve: Wall Street. In 1914, America was officially neutral, but its bankers smelled blood in the water. Firms like J.P. Morgan became the lifeline of the Allied war effort. By 1917, Wall Street had been bankrolling the war for years. This wasn't charity. This was a takeover. The United States emerged from the war transformed from a debtor nation into the world's creditor. If you wonder how the 20th century became the American century, it started here. Not on the battlefields, but in the ledgers of New York. France faced its own nightmare. Scarred by previous wars and terrified of invasion, It borrowed heavily from its own citizens and from American banks. This dependency would shape the chaotic politics of the post-war era. Meanwhile, Russia's financial war was a total disaster. As defeats piled up, inflation soared. The collapse of the Tsar wasn't just about ideology. It was about a financial system stretched past its breaking point. Hyperinflation fueled the revolution. Once again, money and power marched together into history. By the end of the war, the old financial order was shattered. Germany soon faced hyperinflation so extreme that a loaf of bread cost billions of marks. Ordinary people, savers, workers, the middle class, were the ones who paid the price. The wealthy elites, they protected themselves. They moved assets abroad, bought real estate, or owned gold. The lesson was brutal but clear. In a financial war, the small saver bleeds first. Even after the guns fell silent, the trap remained. The Treaty of Versailles demanded impossible reparations from Germany. To pay them, Germany borrowed from America. Germany then paid Britain and France, who then used that money to pay back their own debts to America. It was a financial merry-go-round, a circular delusion. When the music stopped in 1929, the entire structure collapsed, leading directly to the Great Depression and eventually a Second World War. Now, think about your life today. When central banks promise that inflation is temporary, when governments expand debt ceilings year after year, when new money is conjured digitally at the stroke of a key. Remember 1914. The playbook hasn't changed. Every modern crisis, from 2008 to the inflation in your grocery store today, has roots in those war years. The system discovered it could detach from reality, and it never reconnected. The hidden financial battle behind World War I is not a relic of the past. It is the foundation of the present. Governments will always find ways to finance their ambitions, and they will always find ways to make you pay for it through taxes, inflation, or the erosion of your savings. Real wealth is the ability to see through these illusions. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it does rhyme. If you want to survive the next chapter, you need to read the previous ones. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The past has the answers.